Welcome to the hidden side of the global phenomenon that has redefined the music industry, a journey into the quiet, echoing chambers of the heart where the roar of the crowd cannot reach. We often see the 7 members of BTS as untouchable icons, draped in luxury and surrounded by the unwavering love of the army. But what if I told you that beneath the flawless choreography and the record-breaking hits lies a mosaic of shattered promises and bittersweet goodbyes? Tonight, we are peeling back the layers of the idol persona to explore a raw human reality that is rarely discussed in the headlines. The agonizing romantic histories that shaped these 7 men into the poets they are today. Have you ever wondered if the soul-stirring high notes or the gut-wrenching rap verses were actually born from a place of real, tangible pain? Is it possible that the very fame we celebrate became the wall that stood between them and the people they once cherished most? What kind of sacrifices does one make when they trade a normal life for a seat on the throne of pop culture? We are about to dive deep into the archives of their pre-debut days and the early years of their journey, uncovering the stories of high school sweethearts, unrequited crushes, and the devastating choice between a dream and a heartbeat. Who among them sat alone in a park, crying over a phone call that changed everything? Which member's first love became the ghost that haunts his most famous lyrics? This isn't just a countdown, it's an emotional autopsy of the most famous hearts on the planet. As we prepare to rank these stories from the poignant to the truly soul-crushing, ask yourself, would you be willing to lose the one you love to gain the world? The answers might surprise you, and the details will certainly move you to tears. This is the BTS you think you know, through a lens you've never seen, a narrative of love lost in the pursuit of greatness. Get ready, because the mystery of their past is about to be revealed, and once you hear these stories, you will never listen to their music the same way again. Are you prepared to face the shadows behind the purple light? Let's begin this emotional journey into the most tragic love stories of the Bangtan boys, where every heartbeat tells a story of what could have been if destiny hadn't called them to the stage. Would you like me to proceed to number 7? Number 7 RM. The Intellectual's Silent Heartbreak. A love lost to insecurity. We begin our countdown with the leader himself, the man whose IQ and lyrical genius have conquered the world. But once upon a time, Kim Namjoon was just a high school boy navigating the treacherous and confusing waters of first love. Imagine a young Namjoon, long before the tailored suits and the historic speeches at the United Nations, sitting in a classroom in Ilsan with a heart heavy with the weight of a relationship that was slowly slipping through his fingers like sand. This wasn't a story of betrayal in the traditional sense, but something far more relatable and quietly devastating, the slow erosion of trust born from youthful insecurity. In several candid reflections, Namjoon has opened up about a girl he dated in high school, a girl who was vibrant, social, and surrounded by a wide circle of male friends, a situation that became a psychological battlefield for a young man who was still trying to find his own footing in the world. Can you picture the scene? The flickering fluorescent lights of a late-night study hall, the vibration of a cell phone on a wooden desk, and the sinking feeling in your stomach when you see your partner laughing a little too loudly with someone else. For Namjoon, this wasn't just about jealousy. It was about the fundamental mismatch of their social circles and the constant, nagging feeling that he wasn't enough to hold her attention. He has described how they would argue constantly, not because they didn't care for each other, but because they were simply too different in how they navigated the world. He felt as though he was constantly trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, pushing himself to be someone he wasn't, just to keep her close. The tragedy here isn't just the breakup itself, but the way it forced a young, brilliant mind to confront his own shadows and inadequacies. It's the kind of heartbreak that leaves you questioning your own worth, wondering if your intellect is a barrier to true connection. This relationship became a catalyst for his music, a raw wound that he would eventually cauterize with lyrics about self-love and the complexity of human emotions. Think about the song Reflection, the lonely walk by the Han River, the desire to love oneself. Doesn't it feel like the echoes of that high school boy who felt like an outsider in his own romance? The sheer emotional exhaustion of trying to sustain a love that feels like a constant competition with the rest of the world is a burden no teenager should carry, yet it was this very pain that forged the philosophical leader we know today. He had to learn the hard way that you cannot force a heart to settle if it is wired to wander, and that sometimes the most intelligent thing you can do is walk away from a love that makes you feel small. As we look at the global icon he is now, it's almost impossible to imagine him feeling less than, but that's the power of this narrative. It humanizes the legend. It reminds us that even a man who can speak for a generation once sat in silence, staring at a phone that wouldn't ring, wondering where it all went wrong. The fact that he chose his career and his growth over a toxic cycle of doubt shows the strength of his character, but the scars of that first real failure in love surely remain. How many of you have stayed in a relationship long after the red flags appeared, simply because the thought of being alone was scarier than the constant arguing? Namjoon lived that reality, and he did so while carrying the pressure of being a top student with a future that felt like a heavy cloak. This story ranks at number 7 because while it ended in growth, the journey through that tunnel of insecurity was a lonely, agonizing path for a young boy who just wanted to be understood. It's a classic tale of right person, wrong time, and perhaps the wrong maturity level for the deep, philosophical love Namjoon was already capable of giving. The girl from his past might see him on billboards now and wonder what could have been. But for Namjoon, she remains a ghost in his lyrics, a reminder of the time he lost himself while trying to find a way into someone else's heart. It's a poignant start to our list, proving that even the strongest leaders have a past defined by the very human struggle of wanting to be someone's only in a world that feels far too crowded. Would you like me to proceed to number 6? Number 6. Suga, the radio confession, a cold boy's warmest regret. As we climb higher on this list of heart-wrenching memories, we arrive at a story that feels like a scene pulled straight from a vintage Korean drama, set against the backdrop of a chilly Daegu evening where a young boy's pride became his own worst enemy. We are talking about Min Yoongi, the man known for his razor-sharp tongue and his Suga persona, but long before he was the king of the stage, he was a middle schooler, grappling with a love that was as intense as it was poorly handled. Can you imagine a young, shy Yoongi already finding solace in music but struggling to find his voice in the real world? This isn't just a story of a breakup, it's a story of a letter that would eventually be read aloud on a local radio station, exposing a vulnerability that he usually kept buried under layers of indifference. The story goes back to a girl who was originally his friend, someone who stood by him when he was just another face in the crowd, but as feelings shifted from friendship to something deeper, the dynamic became a heavy burden for a boy who didn't know how to be vulnerable. Imagine the tension of a first relationship where you are so afraid of being hurt that you end up hurting the person you care about most. Yoongi has admitted that during this relationship, he was incredibly shy and didn't know how to express his feelings, often acting cold or distant as a defense mechanism, a classic tsundere before the term was even a trend. He felt that he couldn't treat her the way she deserved, and the guilt began to eat at him from the inside out. Don't you think it's tragic when the person you love becomes the mirror that shows you all your flaws? Eventually, the weight of his own awkwardness and the mounting pressure of their silent misunderstandings led to the end of their relationship. But the real heartbreak came later, when Yoongi, filled with a deep sense of regret, decided to write a letter to a radio host to apologize for his behavior. In that letter, he poured out his heart, admitting that he was the one who was too shy and that he deeply regretted the way he had treated her. He spoke of how he wished he could go back and be a better partner, a more present boyfriend, someone who wasn't afraid to say, "I love you," or "I'm sorry" in the moment. Can you feel the ache of a young boy realizing that he let something beautiful slip away because he was too scared to be seen? This story is ranked at number 6 because it captures the universal tragedy of the one that got away due to our own immaturity. It wasn't a lack of love that ended them, but a lack of courage to be soft. Even now, when you listen to his solo tracks as August D or his heartfelt verses in BTS songs, you can hear the echoes of that regret, the theme of wanting to go back to the past, the struggle with one's own shadow, and the longing for a connection that isn't mediated by fame or expectations. How many of you have looked back at a past relationship and wished you could just say one thing differently? For Yoongi, that one thing was his entire personality during that time. This narrative is a reminder that even the most stoic individuals carry a well of deep emotion, and sometimes, the quietest hearts are the ones that have been broken in the most profound ways. The mystery lies in how that specific heartbreak fueled his drive to succeed, perhaps as a way to prove something to himself or to the girl who once held his heart in a quiet Daegu schoolyard. Is it possible that the Min Yoongi we see today is a man who decided that if he couldn't be good at love, he would be the best at music? The atmosphere of this story is one of lingering what-ifs, and the soft static of a radio station playing in the dark, a haunting tribute to a love that was lost to silence. It makes you wonder, if he could meet her today, would he still be that shy boy? Or has the pain of that first regret finally healed into something like peace? The depth of his reflection in that letter shows a level of maturity that most teenagers don't possess, yet it came at the cost of his own happiness. This is the quiet tragedy of Suga, a man who writes songs for the world but once wrote a letter for just one person, only to realize he was a few chapters too late. It's a beautifully sad realization that sometimes the most important lessons in love are learned through the tears of a breakup we caused ourselves. As we move forward, the stories only get more intense, but Suga's radio confession remains a cornerstone of the human behind the idol, a boy who was simply too human for his own good. Number 5. Jimin, the silent echo of unrequited love, a heart that beat in secret. Now, we move into a territory that feels both incredibly sweet and devastatingly lonely, focusing on the man known as the Angel of BTS, Park Jimin. When we see him on stage, he is a whirlwind of grace, a performer who commands every eye in the room with his fluid movements and piercing gaze, but behind that confidence lies the story of a young boy in Busan who was paralyzed by a love that never found its voice. Imagine a younger Jimin, a dedicated student at the Busan High School of Arts, pouring his soul into contemporary dance while carrying the heavy, silent weight of a one-sided crush. This isn't a story of a messy breakup or a dramatic confrontation, but rather the quiet tragedy of unrequited love, a pain that many of us know all too well, but one that Jimin experienced with a peculiar, heart-wrenching intensity. Have you ever looked at someone and felt your entire world tilt, yet you couldn't even manage to say a simple hello without your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird? Jimin has confessed that in his youth, he fell deeply for someone, but he was so incredibly shy and so consumed by his own perceived inadequacies that he never once gathered the courage to confess his feelings. Can you feel the atmosphere of those Busan afternoons? The smell of the salty sea air mixing with the scent of the wooden floor in the dance studio, and Jimin sitting in the corner watching her from a distance, his face turning a bright, uncontrollable red every time their eyes accidentally met. He has mentioned in interviews that his face would flush so intensely that everyone around him probably knew, yet the words remained locked away. Think about the psychological toll that takes on a young person to love someone so much that it becomes a physical burden, yet to feel so not enough that you decide silence is safer than rejection. This was a time before the fame, before the global recognition, when Jimin was still struggling with his own self-image, often pushing himself to the brink of exhaustion to perfect his craft. Was he working so hard because he wanted to be worthy of that love? Or was the dance studio the only place where he could escape the deafening silence of his own heart? The tragedy here is the what if that haunts the hallways of his memory. He eventually had to leave Busan behind to chase his dreams in Seoul, effectively walking away from that unspoken love without ever knowing if she might have felt the same way. Imagine the train ride from Busan to Seoul, the tracks clicking beneath him as he moved further and further away from the girl who made his heart race, knowing that by choosing his dream, he was permanently closing the door on a chapter that never even truly began. This story ranks at number 5 because it represents a very specific kind of soul-crushing regret. The regret of the unspoken. While other members had the closure of a breakup, Jimin had to carry the weight of a story with no ending. This unrequited love became a foundational element of his emotional depth. You can hear it in the yearning of his solo tracks, in the way he expresses longing through the tilt of his head or the reach of his fingertips during a performance. It's a raw, visceral vulnerability that makes armies want to protect him at all costs. How many times have we seen him comfort the other members, acting as the group's emotional glue, perhaps because he knows exactly what it feels like to hurt in private? The mystery of who she was remains, but the impact she had on his soul is visible every time he sings about love and loss. It's a narrative of a boy who grew up too fast, trading the chance of a simple, local romance for the lonely pedestal of superstardom. Even now, with millions of people screaming his name, one has to wonder if there's a small part of him that still remembers the silence of that Busan classroom and the girl who never knew she was the muse for one of the greatest artists of our generation. Does he look out into the sea of purple lights and search for a face that reminds him of her? Or has he channeled all that suppressed emotion into the perfectionism that defines him today? The tragedy of Jimin's love story is that it ended before it started, leaving him with a heart full of words that were never spoken, and a career built on the very emotions he was once too shy to share. It's a beautiful, lingering sadness that reminds us that even the most loved people in the world can feel completely invisible to the one person who matters most. As we prepare to move into the top 4, the stories transition from youthful crushes to the devastating sacrifices of adulthood. Are you ready to see how the pressures of the industry began to tear apart the most promising connections? Number 4, Jin, the betrayal of the golden boy, a heart shattered behind the visual. As we break into the top 4, we encounter a story that feels like a jagged piece of glass hidden beneath a velvet cloth. We are talking about Kim Sok-jin, the worldwide handsome man whose laughter often fills the room and whose confidence seems unshakable. But behind that radiant smile lies a scar from his youth that changed the way he views trust forever. Imagine a young Sok-jin, a student at Jungkook University, a boy so striking that he was scouted just for stepping off a bus. Before the fame, before the light sticks, and before the sold-out stadiums, Jin was a young man who believed in the simple, fairy tale promise of a first, serious love. He wasn't the Jin of BTS yet, he was just Sok-jin, a guy who gave his heart completely to a girl he believed was his forever. But the tragedy of this narrative isn't just a simple breakup, it's the soul-crushing weight of betrayal. It has been whispered and reflected in his older interviews and the emotional depth of his solo work that Jin experienced the ultimate sting, being cheated on by the person he trusted most. Can you imagine the sheer psychological impact of that? Here is a man the world now calls the standard of beauty, a man who seems to have everything, yet in his most vulnerable years, he was made to feel replaceable. Picture him in the quiet corners of his university campus, perhaps holding a bouquet or a letter, only to discover that the person he was building a future with had already moved on to someone else behind his back. The atmosphere of this story is one of cold, gray rain, the kind that soaks into your bones and makes you question everything you thought you knew about your own worth. Why wasn't he enough? How could someone look into those kind eyes and choose to deceive him? This betrayal didn't just break his heart, it forced him to build a fortress around his emotions. This is why, for many years, Jin was seen as the most private member regarding his inner feelings, using humor and dad jokes as a protective shield to keep the world from seeing the lingering hurt. This story ranks at number 4 because it highlights the painful irony of his life. He is loved by millions, yet his first major experience with love was a lesson in how easily people can be cruel. Think about the lyrics to Epiphany, the realization that I'm the one I should love in this world. Doesn't that sound like a man who had to learn the hard way that you can't rely on someone else to define your value? He had to rebuild his ego from the ground up after someone he loved tried to tear it down. The sacrifice he made was his innocence. He traded a naive belief in romance for a pragmatic, almost defensive focus on his career. When he joined Big Hit as a trainee, he was already carrying this heavy emotional baggage, working late into the night to master dances he wasn't naturally gifted at, all while nursing a heart that had been discarded. The mystery lies in the what if. What if that girl hadn't cheated? Would he have been as driven to succeed, or was his meteoric rise partly fueled by a subconscious desire to show the person who hurt him exactly what she lost? Every time he blows a kiss to the camera or calls himself worldwide handsome, there's a layer of defiance there, a victory over the boy who once felt invisible and betrayed. This is the hidden documentary of Jin's heart, a journey from the depths of being not enough for one person to being the everything for the entire world. It's a narrative of resilience, but the path to that resilience was paved with tears shed in the shadows of a Seoul dorm room where no one could see him. We often forget that before he was a superstar, he was a boy who just wanted to be loved back, and the fact that he had to find that love within himself instead of in another person is a tragedy that many of us are still living today. How many of you have looked in the mirror and felt the sting of someone else's choice to leave? For Jin, that mirror reflected a face the world would eventually worship, but for a long time, all he saw was the reflection of someone who had been lied to. The depth of this pain is what makes his current message of self-love so authentic. It wasn't a marketing slogan, it was a survival tactic. As we leave the story of the Golden Boy and move toward the top 3, the narratives shift from personal betrayals to the agonizing weight of destiny and the sacrifices made for the sake of the group's survival. Are you ready to dive into the story of a member who had to choose between the love of his life and the survival of BTS itself, a choice that still echoes in the silence of his solo tracks? Number 3, J-Hope, the Sunshine's Shadow, abandoned at the terminal of broken dreams. We have reached the top 3, and the air is getting thick with an emotional weight that is almost hard to breathe. We are stepping into the world of Jungkook, the man we affectionately call Hobie, the human embodiment of a sunbeam who lights up every room he enters. But have you ever stopped to wonder why his smile is so blindingly bright? Is it possible that the sunshine persona is a brilliant, carefully constructed shield designed to protect a heart that was once left out in the cold, discarded at a literal crossroads of his life? Long before the world knew him as J-Hope, Hoseok was a young man in Gwangju, a legendary street dancer whose passion for movement was matched only by his devotion to a girl who held his entire world in her hands. This wasn't just a puppy love. For a young Hoseok, this was the anchor that held him steady as he navigated the uncertain waters of a career in the arts. But the tragedy of J-Hope's heart is one that plays out like a gritty, indie film set in a lonely bus terminal, a place of transitions where his life was about to be split in two. Can you see him there? A young, hopeful Hoseok, perhaps waiting with a heart full of plans, only to be met with the devastating news that the person he loved had chosen someone else, a person who was already waiting for her. The sheer visceral pain of being replaced in real time, at a place meant for journeys and new beginnings, is a trauma that would leave anyone reeling. He didn't just lose a girlfriend. He lost his sense of security at the very moment he was preparing to embark on the most difficult journey of his life, moving to Seoul to become a trainee. Imagine the atmosphere of that Gwangju bus station, the smell of exhaust fumes, the flickering fluorescent lights, the muffled announcements of departures you aren't ready to take, and the crushing realization that while you are moving toward a dream, the person you wanted to share it with is walking away into someone else's arms. This story is ranked at number 3 because of the sheer cruelty of its timing and the way it forced Hoseok to transform his entire identity. He had to pack up his broken heart and carry it onto that bus to Seoul, sitting in a plastic seat while watching his hometown disappear in the rearview mirror, knowing that he was now truly alone in his pursuit of greatness. This wasn't just a breakup, it was an abandonment that happened on the doorstep of his destiny. How many of you have had to put on a happy face for work or school while your soul felt like it was being hollowed out? Hoseok lived that every single day of his trainee years. This is the origin of the Mask of J-Hope. He decided that if the world could be that cold, he would become the source of warmth. He channeled that agonizing rejection into a drive so intense that he became the dance captain, the perfectionist who wouldn't let anyone see a single crack in his armor. But if you look closely at his solo work, especially the hauntingly beautiful Blue Side, you see the ghost of that boy at the bus terminal. The lyrics speak of a longing to return to a time before the pain, a desire to be back in the blue where things were simpler, even if they were sad. The contrast between his public persona and this private blue side is one of the most poignant narratives in all of music history. Was he trying to prove her wrong? Was every flawless dance move a silent message to the girl who thought he wasn't enough? The mystery lies in how he managed to turn such a jagged, painful betrayal into a message of hope for millions of others. He chose a stage name that literally means hope, a daily commitment to being the very thing he felt he had lost that day at the terminal. This narrative is a masterclass in emotional resilience, but the cost was the burial of his own sorrow. Every time he laughs a little too loudly or dances until he collapses, you have to wonder if he's still trying to outrun the memory of that bus pulling away. The psychological depth of this story is staggering, to be left at a crossroads and then to become the road for everyone else. This is why his story sits firmly at number 3. It is the ultimate sacrifice of the self for the sake of a persona that the world needed. He traded his right to be sad for the responsibility of making us happy. But in the quiet moments, when the stage lights go down and the cheering stops, does he still feel the chill of that Gwangju evening? Does he still see the face of the one who didn't wait for him? As we prepare to move into the top 2, the stories become even more complex, involving the literal intervention of fate and the heartbreaking choices made in the name of global stardom. We are approaching the pinnacle of this emotional countdown, where the line between idol and human completely vanishes. Are you ready to witness the story of a member whose love was so deep it became a secret he had to carry like a heavy stone into the spotlight? Number 2 volts. A rainy phone call to nowhere. The love that never picked up. We have reached the penultimate spot on our countdown, and here we find a story so cinematically tragic that it feels like a lost scene from a melancholic Wong Kar-wai film, starring the man with the most soulful eyes in the industry, Kim Taehyung. We know him as V, the fashion icon, the baritone powerhouse, and the man who was recently voted the most handsome face in the world. But let's travel back to a much simpler, much lonelier time in Daegu. Imagine a young Taehyung, long before the Gucci suits and the sold-out shows at Wembley Stadium, a boy who carried his heart on his sleeve and found beauty in the smallest details of life. He was a boy who loved deeply and purely, and for a long time there was one girl who occupied every corner of his thoughts, a high school crush that felt like the beginning and the end of his world. This wasn't just a fleeting attraction. It was a slow, burning devotion that he had nurtured in secret for years, waiting for the perfect moment to finally bridge the gap between friendship and something more. Can you picture the atmosphere of that fateful day? The sky over Daegu was heavy and gray, eventually breaking into a relentless, rhythmic downpour that mirrored the nervous drumming of Taehyung's own heart. He had finally gathered the courage, that rare, terrifying brand of courage that only comes once in a lifetime, to tell her how he felt. He didn't want to do it in person where his voice might fail him, so he decided to make the call. Imagine him standing there, perhaps huddled under a small awning to escape the rain, his fingers trembling as he dialed her number. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement was the only soundtrack to his desperation. He called, and the phone rang, and rang, and rang. But there was no answer. He didn't give up after the first try. He called again and again and again, driven by a hope that was slowly being drowned by the storm. He spent hours that day, wandering through the rain, his clothes soaking through to his skin, his phone held tightly in his hand as if it were a lifeline. Have you ever felt that specific kind of coldness that doesn't come from the weather, but from the realization that you are being ignored by the only person you want to talk to? Taehyung eventually realized that the silence on the other end of the line was his answer. The girl he had placed on a pedestal, the one he had planned a future for in his mind, simply didn't pick up. This is the ultimate unanswered tragedy. He eventually boarded a bus to go home, sitting by the window as the raindrops raced each other down the glass, feeling a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of success would ever truly fill. The sheer loneliness of that bus ride home, the silence of the engine, the damp smell of his clothes, and the crushing weight of a confession that would never be heard is a narrative that still seems to haunt the edges of his most emotional performances. This story ranks at number 2 because it highlights a deep, existential loneliness that exists within Taehyung. It's the tragedy of a man who is now chased by the world, whose every word is recorded and analyzed, yet who once stood in the rain for hours just hoping for a single hello that never came. Doesn't it make you wonder if his love for jazz, with its themes of longing and late-night melancholy, was born in the aftermath of that rainy afternoon? You can hear the echoes of that unanswered phone call in the deep, resonant tones of stigma and the nostalgic yearning of inner child. He often speaks about wanting to be a cool person for his future children, perhaps because he knows exactly how it feels to be treated as if you don't matter. The mystery of why she didn't pick up remains. Was it intentional? Was it fate protecting him for something bigger? Or was it just a cruel coincidence of timing? Regardless of the reason, the impact on Taehyung was profound. It turned a boy who believed in fairy tales into a man who understands that some of the most beautiful stories are the ones that are never told. How many of you have sat with your phone in your hand, waiting for a notification that never appears, feeling the silence of the room grow louder with every passing minute? For Taehyung, that silence became a part of his soul, a secret chamber of sadness that he occasionally invites us into through his music. It's a beautifully tragic realization that the most desired man on the planet once felt completely undesirable in a rainy Daegu street. This narrative is a reminder that fame doesn't erase the scars of the past, it only provides a larger stage on which to express them. Number 1. Jungkook, the boy who traded his heart for a crown, the golden sacrifice. We have finally arrived at the summit of our emotional journey, and it brings us to the youngest, the golden maknae, the man who seems to have been born under a lucky star, Jungkook. But as the saying goes, all that glitters is not gold, and for a boy who began his journey into the harsh spotlight of the idol world at the tender age of 13, the price of that gold was the very essence of his youth and his first, most innocent experience with love. Imagine, if you will, a young Jungkook still carrying the soft features of a child, leaving the comfort of his family in Busan to live in a cramped dorm in Seoul, driven by a dream he barely understood but was determined to catch. Before he became the global superstar who could sell out stadiums in minutes, he was a student at Gwanak High School, trying to balance the impossible demands of a trainee's life with the natural, blossoming feelings of a teenager. The tragedy of Jungkook's love story is not one of a dramatic fight or a scandalous betrayal, but something far more haunting and quietly devastating. It is the story of a love that simply withered away because he was too busy becoming a legend to be a boyfriend. Can you picture the sheer, exhausting reality of his daily life? He would wake up before the sun, attend school, and then spend 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours in a windowless practice room, dancing until his knees buckled and singing until his voice was a rasp. In the middle of this whirlwind, there was a girl from his pre-debut or early debut days who held a place in his heart. But how do you maintain a connection when you are forbidden from having a private life? When your phone is monitored, and when your every waking second is dedicated to a career that demands your total soul? Jungkook has admitted in early Raw interviews that he once had a girlfriend, but the way it ended is what truly breaks the heart. He confessed that they eventually drifted apart because he didn't have the time to see her, famously stating that they didn't even meet for something like 200 days. Can you feel the crushing weight of that realization? Imagine being 15 or 16, supposedly in the prime of your first romance, yet you are so physically and mentally removed from the person you love that the relationship becomes nothing more than a ghost of a memory. It wasn't that he stopped caring, it was that his dream required him to sacrifice his humanity. He chose the stage over the simple joy of a high school date, the grueling choreography over the warmth of holding someone's hand in a park, and the cold, bright lights of the studio over the soft glow of a shared conversation. This is the golden sacrifice. The tragedy lies in the fact that he was so young, he didn't even realize what he was losing until it was already gone. He has reflected on this with a poignant, almost detached sadness, suggesting that at the time, he didn't even really know what love was supposed to be because he was a child being molded into a product. Think about the psychological impact of growing up in an environment where your success is measured by your ability to be perfect for the public, while your private emotional needs are pushed to the absolute bottom of the priority list. Was he lonely in those dorm rooms? Staring at a phone that he couldn't even use to call the one person who made him feel like just Jungkook? The atmosphere of this story is one of a silent, empty room after a massive concert, the roar of the crowd still ringing in your ears, but the person you want to tell about it is no longer there. This narrative sits at number 1 because it represents the total loss of a normal life. While the older members had at least a few years of semi-normalcy, Jungkook gave his entire adolescence to the ARMY and the BTS legacy. Every love song he sings now, every gut-wrenching lyric about longing or still with you, is informed by that void where a normal first love should have been. He is the man who has everything, yet he is also the boy who had to learn how to be an adult without ever getting to be a teenager in love. How many of you would trade your most precious memories of your youth for a chance at fame? Jungkook didn't even get to make that choice consciously. The machine of the industry made it for him. This is why his story is the most heartbreaking. It is a permanent, unchangeable loss of innocence. The golden maknae is golden because he was forged in the fire of total self-sacrifice, and the girl who once waited for a call that never came is the silent witness to the man he had to become. It's a story of a boy who reached for the stars and caught them, only to find that the stars are cold and the space between them is very, very lonely. As we look at him today, a man of immense power and influence, we must remember the 15-year-old boy in the practice room who had to say goodbye to his own heart just so he could win ours. Does he ever look back and wonder if the 200 days of silence were worth it? Or does the love of the ARMY fill that gap? The answer is hidden in the silence between his notes, a mystery that only he truly understands. This is the final, most tragic rank on our list. The love that wasn't lost to a person, but to a destiny that was too big for one heart to hold.